I started to ask myself 3 questions. If it's who is driving the bus then? Where are they taking us, and what can we do about it? And this, like it was said over and over again, these standards-based education did not begin with Common Core. And in his quote, when they created Achieve, who wrote the standards for NGA and CCSO, they said on there that they created Achieve to create a standards-based education. And so it started much earlier with, partially with a man called Mark Tucker, and we've talked about him a little bit. He was the one that wrote the Dear Hillary letter, and we're going to go over a couple of more points that he made when the Clintons got put in the White House. He is writing a letter about what needs to happen in education. He talks about advancing the agenda on which you and we have all been working, and this agenda is that standards-based education agenda. He says, we think the great opportunity you have is to remold the entire American system. Grace brought that up, but remold the entire American system into what? And then he talks about human resource development. Again, that goes back to workforce education. He talks about cradle to grave, and it's the same for everyone, as if everyone is the same. He goes on to talk about we have a national system of education in which curriculum, pedagogy, examinations, and teacher education and licensure systems are all linked to the national standards. Creating such a system means changing deeply embedded institutional structures. Radical changes in attitudes, values, and beliefs are required to move any combinations of these agendas. A new broad consensus will be required. So they're talking about a lot of changes that began with Goals 2000, School to Work, No Child Left Behind, and like Grace said, we've been planting and preparing the ground. Now this is the fruition of what they've been working on, is Common Core. T. Kenneth James, who is the Commissioner of Education in Arkansas and the President of the Council of Chief State School Officers, agreed with Representative McKeon that state leaders are likely to be much more wary about a movement toward common standards if it appears to come with a federal mandate attached. But he said Congress and the U.S. Department of Education should focus on using the bully pulpit, using the power of the White House, to help bolster the movement and consider providing federal resources, particularly for assessments. I think it can be done without the perception that the federal government is driving the train or driving the bus. So it concerns me when we start to see things like this, that they keep trying to tell us that, oh, it just, Common Core is a new thing and it's state-led.
One of them is the Common Core standards. And most people, when trying to understand how that could have happened, right? In other words, how could it be that in a country locked against itself that something broke in this way? When I was involved in convincing governors and others around this country to adopt these standards, it was not Obama likes them. Do you think that would have gone well with the Republican crowd? Shouldn't you instead be meeting with the Council of Chief State School Officers? Those of you who say that probably have not attended as many of those meetings as I have. And they might wonder whether we had a legion of talented lobbyists or friends in the right places. Tom, who knows me well, knows how pathetic the beginnings of the Common Core standard movement were. Think of a napkin. Think of a few people in a room with an idea.
Now, does this sound state-led to you? First, you had to sell it to the governors. Then it was, think of a napkin, think of a few people in a room with an idea. So I don't know why we keep hearing that they are state-led. If they were state-led, there would be no copyright. There would be no, states wouldn't have to be baited and coerced like we've heard about into accepting unseen standards. There would be no need for millions to be spent by foundations, corporations, and the federal government and public and private partnerships to bribe groups into supporting and pushing said standards. And education administrators and teachers would feel free to voice concerns without retribution or the loss of jobs and privileges. They constantly tell us that whether we're not hearing anything from our teachers, they love it. Well, number one, they've been taught all through college. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. We've got all these organizations that are being paid to help them know how great this is. And if they say anything, they're in trouble. Patrick's flow chart that he's already gone over shows us who is and who isn't the key players in the Common Core. And one thing that you see is it makes it clear who is not driving the bus. It is not individual citizens, parents, schools, or states. Again, his little chart, and the biggest thing you see on that chart is the green, which is the data. And then we have Arnie Duncan, who said the federal government has nothing to do with curriculum. And he was speaking at this time to the American Society of News Editors about how to report on Common Core. They've got to be told how to report it. In fact, he said, we're prohibited by law from creating or mandating curricula. So they know all that. The Department of Education is prohibited from creating and mandating curricula, yet the department has coerced, urged, cajoled, and bribed American educators into joining the Common Core State Standards Initiative. They have funded tests upon which these standards were based and have mandated that the testing consortiums must share the student-level data. As I grew up, I was always taught when you pick up one end of the stick, you also pick up the other. And that's true with Common Core. When you pick up the Common Core, you also pick up assessments, curricula, and control of ideas. And they continue to reassure us again that this is all about standards. Joseph Califano had this to say. He said, any set of test questions that the federal government prescribes should surely be suspect as a first step toward a national curriculum. Carried to its full extent, national control of curriculum is a form of national control of ideas. Yeah, and that's the question. Whose ideas? Test questions that have been set up by the federal government or else funded and controlled by the federal government. Bill Gates, as we talked about, is the great funder of this. He also signed a cooperative agreement with UNESCO in 2004. UNESCO is the United Nations Education Department, and he says, and he agreed to create a global education system. Gates states that Microsoft supports the objectives of UNESCO. So what we need to know is what are the objectives of UNESCO. Gates has funded, we said $150 million when we started talking to people, but I think Patrick says it's up closer to 260 million that Gates has spent. He also has partnered with Pearson. UNESCO, what does it mandate or what does it expect of its people? And this is what it mandates to its education-based NGOs, including IB. This is downplay nationality in teaching lest the kids identify too strongly with their country. Teach peace, defined by the UN as more than the absence of war, requiring social equity, redistribution of resources. In other words, in order to have peace, we've got to redistribute resources from those that have to those that have not throughout the world. It's a global redistribution, and America comes out the loser. Teach sustainable development. You will see that word, those two words, everywhere. And that is putting resources out of reach and redistributing others under the guise of social and environmental justice. Teach local to global activism and execute UNESCO's educational objectives and report back to UNESCO. So here is another place that data has a place to go. Report back to UNESCO on activities and results. One quote that came out of one of their publications says, as long as the child breathes the poisoned air of nationalism, education in world-mindedness can produce only rather precarious results. As we have pointed out, it is frequently the family that infects the child with extreme nationalism. The school should therefore use the means described earlier to combat family attitudes that favor favor jingoism, and jingoism is extreme nationalism. So what is the threat to world-mindedness? The family. And the education that the family gives to their children. Pearson textbook. Sir Michael Barber of England is the Chief Education Advisor at Pearson, and the Common Core Promoter Extraordinaire is also a global education and standards promoter. Barber talks about sustainable reform as irreversible reform, and he directs education policymakers to make it so it can never go back to how it was before. If you want irreversible reforms, work on the culture and the minds of teachers and parents. Otherwise, he says, people might repeal what's been done because of their wish for the past. Make it so it can never go back to how it was before.
That's what happened in the Russian Revolution.
So work on the minds of the teachers and the parents, and so that we won't wish for what we had. We've talked about Joseph Rella and the money trails. He talks about how they tend to gain. He says, from test makers to publishers to data management corporations, all making tremendous profits from the chaotic change. When the scores drop, they prosper. When the tests change, they prosper. When schools scramble to buy materials to raise scores, they prosper. And he goes on. But where are they taking us? Are they taking us towards constitutional government and a stronger nation? Are they taking us towards stronger parental and local rights and stronger and better children? Family solidarity, personal property rights, religious freedom? Or are they taking us towards a global competitive workforce with world citizenship, environmentalism, global advocacy, social justice, climate change, education for sustainable development, and so on. Let's see where our time is. Okay, we could go on forever on all of this, but I want to read this one quote. It says, "This battle is between the collusion of corporate greed and political muscle versus the individual voter. It's a battle between the individual student, teacher, or parent versus huge public-private partnerships. That's the David and Goliath that we see today." And so what can we do about it? Educate ourselves, educate others, let your voice be heard to your local school boards, your legislatures. That makes a huge, huge difference if you call in and let them know that you are against this. We are working on getting PARC defunded because the assessments are the glue that makes all of this work. It's the part that holds the longitudinal data systems and all that together. But you can go on our sites. Every state has a site that's anti-Common Core. And you can go on our site and see what we are trying to do to defund it and to change it. So we all want to ask ourselves, who is driving the bus? Where are they taking us? And what will we do about it?